In the summer of 1952, the skies over Washington, D.C. became the stage for one of the most compelling mysteries of the 20th century. A series of unidentified flying objects captured the attention of the nation and sparked a debate that continues to this day. On the night of July 19, 1952, around 11:40 p.m., radar operator Edward Nugent, an air traffic controller at Washington National Airport, now Ronald Reagan National Airport, spotted 7 strange objects on his radar. The unidentified objects were moving erratically and at high speeds in the airspace over Washington, D.C. The objects were located 15 miles southwest of the city. At this point, Edward Nugent notified his supervisor, Harry Barnes. Barnes then instructed 2 additional radar operators to check Nugent's radar to make sure it wasn't malfunctioning. They found that it was working normally.
Harry Barnes. We knew immediately that a very strange situation existed. Their movements were completely radical compared to those of ordinary aircraft.
Barnes then called National Airport's radar-equipped control tower. The controllers there, Howard Coughlin and Joe Zacco, said they also had unidentified objects on their radar screen. It was at that moment when Coughlin looked into the night sky and made visual affirmation that what they were seeing on the radar, well, it was real. Coughlin spotted a hovering bright light in the night sky, and after some time it took off with incredible speed. Coughlin turned and asked Zacco,
"Did you see that? What the hell was that?"
At this point, even more objects began to appear in all sectors of the radar scope. The radar controllers were now in awe, and they began to worry about what they might be dealing with, because now, the objects, well, they were moving over the White House. Once the unidentified objects approached the White House in our nation's capital, Barnes made the call to Andrews Air Force Base. Barnes spoke to Officer William Brady, who was on duty that night. Brady confirmed he too has seen unidentifiable objects on his radar. Brady also claimed to make visual contact with one of the objects and described it as, quote, an object which appears to be like an orange ball of fire, trailing a tail. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before, unquote. Brady then attempted to alert other personnel in the tower, but the strange object took off at an unbelievable speed. Concerned about the potential threat to national security, the United States Air Force immediately scrambled fighter jets out of Andrews Air Force Base and ordered them to intercept the threat of unidentified flying objects. Meanwhile, back at Washington National Airport, Capital Airlines pilot S.C. Pierman was sitting in the cockpit of his plane waiting for permission to take off when the control tower notified him they detected unknown flying objects headed his way. Shortly after the warning, Pierman saw what he described as 6 white, tailless, fast-moving lights over a 14-minute period. Pierman was in constant radio communication with Barnes for the full duration of that 14-minute period.
Harry Barnes. Each sighting coincided with a pip we could see near his plane. When he reported that the light streaked off at a high speed, it disappeared on our scope.
At this point in the evening, military officials who were trained observers were witnessing UFOs with their own eyes. Back at Andrews Air Force Base, Sergeant Charles Davenport witnessed an orange-red light to the south.
Sergeant Charles Davenport. The light would appear to stand still, then make an abrupt change in direction and altitude. This happened several times.
Colonel Ross Dedrickson also saw 9 UFOs flying in formation over Washington, D.C. He also claimed he didn't just see lights flying in the sky. He was close enough to make out their shape, which he described as disc-shaped and identical to one another in shape and size. Dedrickson also claimed they were illuminated from within.
Colonel Ross Dedrickson. They were quite visible, and their formation looked suspicious to me.
At this point, the unidentified flying objects were disappearing and reappearing all over the radar scope. At one point, both radar centers at National Airport and Andrews Air Force Base were tracking an object hovering over a radio beacon. The object vanished in all three radar centers at the exact same time. At 3 a.m., shortly before two United States Air Force F-94 Starfire jet fighters arrived over Washington from Newcastle Air Force Base in Delaware, all of the objects vanished from the radar. However, when the jets ran low on fuel and left, the objects returned.
Harry Barnes. The UFOs were monitoring radio traffic and behaving accordingly.
The objects were last detected on radar at 5:30 a.m. But this wasn't the end of that saga. 7 days later, the unidentified objects, they returned. At 8:15 p.m. on Saturday, July 26, 1952, a pilot and a stewardess on a National Airlines flight into Washington observed some lights over their plane. Within minutes, both radar centers at National Airport and the radar center at Andrews Air Force Base were tracking more unknown flying objects. United States Air Force Master Sergeant Charles E. Cummings visually observed the objects at Andrews Air Force Base.
Sergeant Charles E. Cummings. These lights did not have the characteristics of shooting stars. There was no trails. They traveled faster than any shooting star I have ever seen.
Meanwhile, Albert M. Chop, the press spokesman for Project Blue Book, arrived at National Airport at 9:30 p.m. The radar center was detecting unknown objects in every sector. At times, the objects moved slowly. At other times, they reversed direction and moved across the radar scope at speeds calculated up to 7,000 miles per hour. At 11:30 p.m., two U.S. Air Force F-94 Starfire jet fighters from Newcastle Air Force Base in Delaware arrived over Washington. Lieutenant William Patterson saw what he described as 4 white glows and chased them.
Lieutenant William Patterson. I tried to make contact with the bogies below 1,000 feet. I was at my maximum speed, but I ceased chasing them because I saw no chance of overtaking them. I see them now and they're all around me. What should I do?
Albert M. Chop. Nobody answered because we didn't know what to tell him.
Shortly after midnight, U.S. Air Force Major Dewey Fournette, who was Project Blue Book's liaison at the Pentagon, arrived at the radar center at National Airport. Fournette made the point that all those present in the radar room were convinced that the targets were most likely caused by solid metallic objects. 2 more F-94s from Newcastle Air Force Base were scrambled during the night. One pilot saw a white light which vanished when he moved towards it. Civilian aircraft also reported glowing objects that corresponded to radar blips seen by Andrews radar operators. As the night went on, unidentified flying objects appeared and disappeared all over the radar scope. And just like July 20th, the sightings and unknown radar returns ended at sunrise. Throughout the following weeks, civilians in the Washington, D.C. area also reported seeing strange lights or objects in the sky during the nights of the incident. Their testimonies corroborated the radar data and observations of military personnel. In the aftermath of the sightings, military officials convened to discuss the implications of the events and coordinate a response. The incident sparked a flurry of media coverage, and public interest in UFOs and extraterrestrial visitation. It was a watershed moment in the study of UFOs. It captured the imagination of the public and prompted serious inquiry into the phenomenon. The United States Air Force conducted an investigation into the incidents, examining radar data, eyewitness testimonies, and other evidence related to the sightings. In the days that followed, the United States Air Force held a press conference to address the public's concerns. They attributed the radar anomalies and sightings to temperature inversions, a conventional explanation for unusual radar returns. United States Air Force Director of Intelligence John A. Stamford held a well-attended press conference at the Pentagon on July 29, 1952.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers. The Air Force interest in this problem has been due to our feeling of an obligation to identify and analyze to the best of our ability anything in the air that may have the possibility of threat or menace to the United States. In pursuit of this obligation, since 1947, we have received and analyzed between 1,000 and 2,000 reports that have come to us from all kinds of sources. Of this great mass of reports, we have been able adequately to explain the great bulk of them, explain them to our own satisfaction. We've been able to explain them as hoaxes, as erroneously identified friendly aircraft, as meteorological or electronic phenomena, or as light aberrations. However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things. It is this group of observations that we now are attempting to resolve. We have, as of date, come to only one firm conclusion with respect to this remaining percentage, and that is that it does not contain any pattern of purpose or of consistency that we can relate with to any conceivable threat to the United States. We can say that the recent sightings are in no way connected with any secret development by any agency of the United States.
With all due respect to the Air Force, I believe that some of them will prove to be of interplanetary origin. During a 3-year investigation, I found that many pilots have described objects of substance and high speed. One case, pilots reported their plane was buffeted by an object which passed them at 500 miles an hour. Obviously, this was a solid object, and I believe it was from outer space.
The Air Force explanation may have satisfied some people, but many like myself remained skeptical. There were too many eyewitnesses, and many of them were trained observers. The United States Air Force Captain Edward J. Rupert, the supervisor of Air Force's Project Blue Book investigation into UFO sightings, wrote that the radar and control tower personnel he spoke to, as well as some Air Force officers, disagreed with the Air Force's explanation. Michael Wertheimer, a researcher for the government-funded Condon Report, investigated the case in 1966 and stated that the radar witnesses still dispute the Air Force's explanation. Former radar controller Howard Coughlin told the Washington Post in 2002 that he was still convinced that he saw an object.
Howard Coughlin. I saw it on the screen and out the window over Washington National Airport.
Decades later, the Washington, D.C. UFO incident remains the subject of fascination and debate. Researchers and UFO enthusiasts continue to analyze the evidence, hoping to uncover the truth behind the sightings and the event of that fateful summer. As the mysteries of the universe beckon, the search for answers continues. A testament to our enduring curiosity and quest for knowledge. Stay vigilant, fellow truth seekers. The truth is out there.